few years, and we've kind of swapped around some roles as people get burned out and move on to other roles. And well, I slid into the president role to take my turn, and just want to put a plug out there for anybody in the audience here or anybody online. We are looking for a few more board members, as we've got some people in different positions that are going to be transitioning out this year. We've got Michael Tonetti doing membership. He's wanting to be done in August, and so we do need somebody to step up and take care of the membership roles, and that will include, collecting the money. Well, money's collected through the treasurer, and then they verify that and set up the membership numbers. And we'd like to keep our seniority numbers, but if we don't have enough help in the membership community, we may just have to do away with that, and we'd rather not do that. So hoping for a volunteer to take over for that. And then we've also got see our yep. Okay. And then we also have our Bruce Knoll that's been doing our newsletter for many years here. He's wanting to step down at the end of the year here as well. So we're kind of experimenting and throwing around the idea of maybe doing something similar to the Railroad Museum's telegrapher, where it'd just be an email that's just kind of formatted with various links and pictures and very simplified. And that way we don't have to do a full layout every month. But if we do have somebody that has those kind of skills and would like to volunteer, and there is some pay for that, just for the costs of software and a little bit of time and the various publishing costs. And we also still do a few printed ones, so that's also involved with our costs, and that does also come out of our bottom line for the year. And so everybody's membership dues goes to pay for things like that. And we've also lost our bookkeeper that had been doing a part-time role, and so we're kind of throwing around the idea of maybe a part-time administrator type position to do like the general bookkeeping. And we don't necessarily need a CPA or anything level, just because we're a pretty small organization and we don't have profit coming in per se, other than just a few sales here and there. Got anything to add to that, Dave?
I could move on to another subject if you want.
But
I don't want to interrupt you.
I got one other subject.
Good, you go.
Just wanted to see if anybody out in the crowd here from the left, my left, is new tonight or first time, or hasn't been here in a long time.
This is our chance to introduce new and visiting folk. There might be a couple over here.
Anybody on the other side here, first night or been here a while? Okay.
Maybe just stand up and tell us your name and how you found us. Glad you made it. And who came with you? Right on. Welcome, Cindy and Leo. Thanks. All right. Also, before I forget, if everybody would silence their cell phones, it's always fun to be embarrassed when Doug starts the show and the crazy thing goes off. Since Chip's in the front row, I'm sure he has announcements about current events in the world of railroading. Should I hand you a mic? Handing him a microphone. He's playing with his phone for a second. Hold on. Oh, yeah. He's silencing his phone or putting it on stun.
Yes. Yes, good evening. Anyways, good news. Rocky Mountaineer should be getting their second painted GP40 in later this month. Right now they're refurbishing their equipment over there at Union Pacific's 36th Street Yard here in Denver. So progress is getting ready for the big April trips that once again resume, and we'll be going back out to Moab, Utah. And let's see, what was the other thing? I didn't mention that. Yes. Oh, no. We don't want to go there. All my current contacts seem to be currently employed, overworked, underloved, yes. And they're looking for a few new faces, they tell me, but you got to be drug-free and got to make sure you don't have any commitments like birthdays, anniversaries, families, stuff like that, details. Yeah. See, I tried to get Dave to join, but he said, no, I got other important things to do. Good. But anyways, things are looking up. Hopefully we'll hear something from Cheyenne shortly about their plans for steam excursions. I don't have any secret information that I can give because Ed's got to keep that all hush hush until he gets the big okay from you know where, Omaha. So all's well in Denver. Everything's on the move, and a few employees are looking for a little more help, they tell me. So
And
thanks for your
speaking of
time.
on the move, the diesel prices have shot through the roof in the last 3 or 4 days. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but
Oh, yeah.
somebody sent me a picture of one from up near Greeley. $4.85 a gallon for diesel.
I just got one from North Platte. She was talking about over $4. Yeah, we're talking
Yes.
about diesel fuel, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But being as trains run on diesel, they probably will be affected by that in the
Oh, eventually. Yeah.
short run here.
They usually do these long-term contracts. So
Mhm.
say until June, they're okay.
Yeah.
And then everything shoots up. And then of course, surcharges to customers will be noticed in the customer
Yep.
base.
And make sure you have locking fuel caps and watch for people drilling holes in your gas tank. I guess they're doing that in Atlanta now, but
Really?
they've probably been doing that for years, but just it's more noticeable now. So.
Oh, hell yeah.
We will talk about transit.
Yes.
soon.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
All right. Am I in the right spot now, Nathan? Okay. Thanks, guys. And he was mentioning Ed Dickens, who will hopefully let everybody know when there's going to be another steam excursion. I've had a long day. Excursion with the big boy. I believe that they definitely are going somewhere this year. They're not publicizing it yet, but hopefully we'll get that out to you as soon as we can. But I know they're planning an excursion that'll probably have them out for a month again, like they did a couple of years ago. Also, if you come to one of our meetings and you join the club, at Keith's table over here, we will give you a copy of the club history book. That's an incentive to get people to join when they come down to see one of our shows. If you don't have anything else, I guess I could introduce the program. Doug,
Because you don't want a bad joke from me.
Oh,
so-
Brian probably wants to
Oh, yep, we got
talk about his
Brian.
engine.
Brian, can you tell us about what you brought today?
hold on 1 second, Brian. He's getting your microphone.
I was noticing the newsletter. They had a picture of a Union Pacific passenger train, a dead heading with a couple of big old engines on the front, switchers or road switchers, and a pretty long train. It looked pretty nice. It was a somewhere in Boone, Kansas, and I was hoping to get some pictures of that in either a Future Trains or a Passenger Train Journal or the Streamliner. So I liked it real well and stuff. So I brought the C8 with me this evening. This was one of the units on the very first Union Pacific Amtrak passenger train, May 2nd, 1971, going from Ogden across to Cheyenne. Then it went from there to Denver. So they had to change the engines from one end of the train to the other in Cheyenne to haul it backwards on the Denver. So I got one of the units here. This is number 928. So I put down here 5271, first Amtrak from Ogden to Cheyenne and stuff. So I brought this up with me to show off because I enjoy showing this stuff off. A lot of stuff I painted myself, but this is factory done. So I just wanted to bring this out, and I like that picture as well in the newsletter. It was a neat picture. If you know what I'm talking about.
All right. Thanks. Thanks. And so for tonight's presentation, Doug Junda has been gracious enough to come down and give us a program. So come on up here, Doug, and I'll let you tell the folks what we've got here.
Hi, I'm Doug Junda. Going to do just a little bit of brief history of the Colorado Midland. We're going to cover mostly from Colorado City to Leadville, up on the railroad there. Some of the earlier pictures and some things like that. Sorry, for the folks at home. Yes. So we'll just be covering some of that area there. I am not the Midland expert. I have Mel McFarland. I think he's been here before, and Art and Adrian Hunhausen are the true experts on the Midland. So a lot of the information I have, I've gotten from those people there. So be happy to answer questions when we're done here, but it's just going to be a brief overview of the Midland. And it's one of my favorite railroads, and that's kind of why I volunteered to do it here. I've done this presentation before, actually for the group up in Ottawa, Canada, a few years ago. So,
Take it away.
all right, let me find their clicker here. Yep. All right, so we're going to start a couple things about me, who I am. If people don't know, I am the owner operator of San Juan Model Company also, which is Grandt Line, and I'll go through all the different ones there, but I am a modeler. I model an SN3, S-scale, and SN2 on that side of it. Started years ago doing resin kits, and now full-time manufacturing of plastic injection, parts, models, everything else. So about 3 years ago, I took over Grandt Line and San Juan Car Kit. So I do the manufacturing. We do all the manufacturing here in town. And we moved it here from California about 3 years ago. I am a trustee at the Colorado Rare Museum, so I'm involved there. And my other break from reality is playing ice hockey. So I play ice hockey a couple times a week just to get a break from everything. And I don't have a remote. Oh, there we go. So San Juan Model Company. These are the companies I have. He allowed me to give a 5-minute break here on what we do. But these are all the companies that I currently run on a daily basis. So I retired from IT, and this is what I do now. So the Colorado Midland, one of their typical engines there on that. We'll go through a couple different Colorado Midland, some of the rolling stock in the beginning here, and then we'll go through the actual railroad itself and starting there. But again, one of the things that attracted me to Colorado Midland is their paint schemes and the things that they did with their locomotives. They had very, very ornate paint schemes on their stuff. You really don't see it on here. It's hard to see, but you can see some of the around the domes here, the lettering here. What has been researched over the years is that this lettering here was like 3 layers of drop shadow lettering in there. Again, very, very ornate, trying to give that impression of being a very prosperous railroad on that side. Going through some of the equipment, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is actually in Leadville of the rotary. And anyone who's ever seen a rotary snowplow run, the vibration from those things are amazing. And why they ever put so many glass windows in this thing, I could never, ever figure out. Yeah, it didn't last that long till it was rebuilt and all the windows were gone. But just to put that many windows into a device that does nothing but shake was amazing to me on there. And this is actually the turntable that was in Leadville there. And you can see it's a Armstrong operated here, turntable up there. Just some of the typical equipment and the paint schemes that the railroad went through with the Pikes Peak route lettering up top here and the Midland route down on the bottom here with the horseshoe. People always make fun of it because the horseshoe is upside down. When you think about luck and you have horseshoes around the house, you always have them to point it up. Their logo had it pointed down, which was kind of a foreshadowing of the railroad, it seems like. The railroad, the Midland was one of the first, what was called a Class 1 railroad to ever be abandoned and gone into totally removed from things during World War I and that. Another just shot of some of the equipment. These are all builder photos from the railroad on that, and you can see the different paint schemes and stuff like that. Pretty ornate, big lettering, things like that. And then one of the cabooses. With the Midland, one thing to recognize is if you look at a lot of these cars, this ornate up here and the light on top was very Santa Fe based. A lot of their engineering people and things like that all came from the Santa Fe. And at one point they were run by the Santa Fe. They were owned by the Santa Fe and took over by the Santa Fe. So a lot of the stuff they had a lot of Santa Fe feel to it. Colorado Midland was known for their wildflower excursions and for their advertising. They had, the horse with the Indian on it. They had the cougar on it. They had all the different paint schemes and the wildflower excursions. So they were a railroad that was very out in the public and ran a lot of different trips for a lot of people, very big into advertising, very big into having a corporate image to the corporate side of things. James Hagerman was the original financier, president of the railroad, moved here from, I think it was Michigan, was involved in mining in Michigan, came here for the health, came here for the dry altitude, was one who raised the money to build the railroad, and was with the railroad for quite a number of years on that side. His real reason for building the railroad and for the other investors in a lot of the railroad is that they owned a lot of mining interest up in Aspen. And their goal was to get a railroad into Aspen and to build something that they could get here and get stuff moved on. Basically, the map of the railroad here, basically from Colorado, it says Colorado Springs, but technically the railroad ran out of Colorado City. Didn't really, it had a transfer track that went into Colorado Springs, but really ran from Colorado City. And this shows it going all the way to Grand Junction. The last section of the railroad was a joint railroad that was operated by the Rio Grande and the Colorado Midland, called the Colorado Junction Railroad. So they didn't own the last section of the railroad. It was a joint operation, and it was they held up their construction quite a bit when they were built. So Colorado Springs, again, starting back in the day, what was initially there with the Santa Fe Depot, the different depots in there, and the Midlands yards and shops were south of there in Colorado City. But this is an early shot here of the Santa Fe depot here. This is a map that I own. It's an amazing map because it's all hand drawn. This is just the one corner of it here of that from 1900. And it was hand drawn here. This shows a detailed image of the yard here. So this is where the railroad began, where they had the roundhouse over here, coaling dock, water tank was way over here. They had their own sawmill down there. The other buildings here that were all part of the shops in that. This was all of their shops. This is where they started. Their whole yard was here. And then this track here was the track that was transferred to Colorado Springs at that point. One of the things to point out on this part, this is the yard coming out here, but this here going down Washington Avenue was the Denver Rio Grande. Denver Rio Grande had a narrow gauge branch back in the early days that went to Manitou Springs. So this was part of the branch here going through Colorado City up to Manitou Springs. And then this here is the transit line, well, the trolley line that came into Colorado City also from Colorado Springs. This is the original Santa Fe Depot in Colorado Springs. The interesting thing, you can see the narrow gauge track here, standard gauge track on there for the Rio Grande when it was still narrow gauge through there. And then this is just one of the later ones of the depot there, a postcard from the Denver Public Library. But this is where they start. This is the roundhouse in Colorado City. The roundhouse is still standing today. I'm not sure what businesses are in there anymore. It used to be a pottery barn or a pottery building in there. But then from the Colorado Midland, it also went to the Midland Terminal. But all the brick here was actually mined right off the branch from in Colorado City. There was a branch that went off into a mine area there where they got all the sandstone to build all the buildings that they had on the railroad there. So this is the roundhouse again, Armstrong. Square ones over here, they said were originally built for the rotary. The rotary wouldn't fit into the rounded sides here, so they built these with the square sides on top for the for the rotary to get inside there. This is kind of towards the end of operations when the Midland terminal had it. Again, the roundhouse here. This is now the ghost town building here. This building was part of their offices here. And then the business office here. You can see the coal dock that was here in this photograph. The water tank now is here where there was another one over here on that side. Again, business office. When the railroad shut down, the building stood vacant here, and then this building burned in 1953. A lot of the documentation on the railroad and stuff that was associated with the railroad was still in the building and was all destroyed when they had the fire up there. So a lot of that stuff got destroyed when the building burned here. And again, another shot of the shops here, water tank over here. Here's the plow after it was rebuilt, obviously, with no more windows. This is taken from the top of the coal dock. So here's the coal dock going down, and this is looking back on the buildings. This building here still exists today. That's one that they said was part of the ghost town up there. The original Colorado City station what you consider was their main depot in where they started. Not very much of a building in there. So this was located on Cimarron Street, basically where Highway 24 is now, where it crosses 25th Street there. Wasn't much of a building. It burned down 1923 or 1931 when the Midland was still running there on that side. But again, for a Home Depot, it really wasn't very much. And there's the rear view of the building there. From there, we jump right to Manitou Springs on there on this here. The line comes into Manitou Springs, comes around the trestle here, the iron trestle, and again comes up here. And then there's tunnels. 1 and 2 are over here, 3 and 4 are over here. Most of the grade here is still in place. The tunnels are still there. Some of them are used today by storage. From what some people were telling me, they were having a big problem with some of these tunnels with vagrants living in them. Nowadays, things like that too on there. But again, coming out of Colorado City up to Manitou Springs, that's where we come up to here. And here's Manitou Springs, looking an early view. Here's a line coming in, going around, coming over and going up here. Real early shot of it here. Here's the original depot that was there. The depot still exists. This building here had been moved and turned, but still exists today. It's a residence now. Years ago, I went up there and I saw the building. And when you look at where it is and how it's adjusted there, and with all the additions, you can still see the original depot there. But it does still exist today, and it's built, again, same sandstone that the roundhouse was built out of, and the buildings down below were built out of. Unfortunately, it's painted white now, and it doesn't look nearly as attractive as I think this would have looked like back in the day. There's just a better shot of it. This was what makes it. You can see this section over here rather easily on that house. So coming up Ute Pass here to tunnel number 1. Here's the trestle over here, but this is the first tunnel here. Again, a lot of this here is still in place today. You can walk a lot of this. I've never walked a lot of on all of this here, but some of it I have. And there's a group that actually goes out and hikes it fairly regularly and does some history stuff with it. Again, coming around the corner from here, tunnel number 1 here, tunnel number 2 is over here, and here's the trestle coming over through here. This is the iron trestle. To me, this was one of the kind of neat things on the railroad. They had big lettering across here, telling it what it is, going over Buston Creek here. This is a much later shot of a Midland terminal train coming over here. They did have a famous derailment where they had a runaway and they lost a couple of boxcars that went over the side of the trestle here and destroyed. This was a photographer's building here and destroyed the building. No one was killed in it, but a couple of freight cars went over, landed on top of this building, destroyed the building. But there's pictures of it and with the freight cars and pieces and things like that up there. Kind of neat pictures to see in that. But this is the iron trestle here, which is kind of one of the hallmarks of the Midland Railroad. They didn't do anything small. They built things solid. They built things to last, thinking that they were going to be a longer term railroad than they really were. And they were the first railroad to really pierce the mountains in Colorado. The first standard gauge railroad, I should say. Everything else up to that point was narrow gauge. This is a photograph from Cameron's coming out of the tunnel here and looking at Cameron's Peak and their Cameron's Cone. There's another shot is that you can see how popular this was. Is William Henry Jackson did one, McClure did one, Buckwall did one, all from basically the same place. Obviously, they didn't have a lot of imagination. They said, well, this guy did it and made money on it. I'm going to take pictures of it. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So coming out of the tunnel, it's the same tunnel. Everything looks the same. Today, you can, when you come over here, you can't see because of the aspen trees, but it still has that same feel to it coming out of there. But you can look, if you look at the track work they did and things like that, it was very, how close the tie spacing was, stuff like that. It was a railroad that was built very well when it was initially built and built to last a while. And again, some colorized shots of it that were done for postcards and stuff like that. Engines coming out of here. I always love the car down here on the below here. The old, I'm not a car guy, so I don't know what that is, what kind of car that is. But again, this became Highway 24 more or less coming up out of Colorado City, going up to Woodland Park on there. This trestle or the tunnel here is still in place. You can still look at it. And this looks like there was photoshopped or drawn in or whatever you call it back in the day. But if you look at the steam off that, it does not look very realistic when you look at these pictures. But so something was added on that side. It looks like on that side. And then here's just the colorized postcard that they did of it. Again, a lot of publicity. Everything was always labeled Colorado Midland Railroad. The publicity that they did and things like that were just amazing, and how much of this stuff still exists today from the postcards and things like that of the day. Coming out of Tunnel 8, you know, again, the same tunnel as we saw before, but you can see the telltales here. So when they go through the tunnel on that, and again, showing in some more of the advertising that the Midland did. This was out of one of Mel McFarland's books over here. Again, Hanging Rock here. This was, again, supposed to be a tunnel. When they built the tunnel, it caved in. So they just made it a cut on there. You know, again, you can see the highway coming up here. Again, this was destroyed when they built the highway there. But, you know, you can see how they built things here, the grades were, and how, you know, sturdy things were built. We move up, we go up to Cascade here. So Cascade, again, the size of the hotel is amazing. To me, it always amazes me when you look at that building. That is a huge building by any stretch of the imagination, especially back in the 1890s. And then the round towers on it and things like that. That how many people could have stayed in that place has to be, you know, phenomenal about how big it was. All outside, you know, balconies, things like that on that. And a lot of these places were developed a lot for health reasons, to get away from, you know, some of the tuberculosis, things like that, that these hotels were built out here and people would come and stay for extended period of times. You can see the railroad coming up here and the depot right over here on this one as they go through here. But and it wasn't just this town that had this. Every town along the road on the way here, as you go through the canyon here, had in a hotel like that. And just when you think about, when I think about it, I think about the manpower to build something like that back in the day. How many people it would have taken to build this building here? And they probably didn't even have plans to work off. They probably just worked off of stuff, you know, and built it, and just it got done on there. This is again the Cascade Depot here. You can see the lake. Oh, sorry, the lake back here. a lot of these lakes here were all developed for ice also. They were all set up because Midland cut a lot of ice on the railroad. So every town, it seems like, has this little pond through here. And they were all built for ice on there. And you can see the depot, and then you had a little freight building over here. This was fairly typical with a lot of the stations coming through here, is that they had these little freight deep. This was a little freight house here for freight, because the freight was not handled through the building here. They were two separate buildings, not the same building on there. Again, this is out of Morris Kofsky's book, which Rocky Mountain Railroad Club published back in, I don't remember what year it was. If someone knows, shout it out. But you know, they published the book on the original Midland book by him on that side. Again, eating houses. You're not that far out of Colorado City, but you have an eating house here. And some of these back when the Santa Fe took over were converted to Harvey houses. So there were actually Harvey houses on the Colorado Midland Railroad that were run with the Harvey girls and the whole nine yards during the day in that point of it. Next one you can see, I always wondered how on these, when you look at this photo, is how they did this back in the day. That's a huge fountain. It looks huge anyway, you know, from the angle, but how they did the fountain back then on those things, and how that water was developed. But you can see the train coming up here, the water tank down here. Again, depot, freight building next to it. Two separate buildings all the time on there. Again, Green Mountain Falls. Green Mountain Falls, if you go up there today, the lake is still here. And, you know, this little island is still there, and they rent paddle boats on here. But again, here's you see another one of the big hotels over here. You can see another shot of it here that they built on here. And again, same thing, railroad, depot, freight depot next to it. But the lake, you know, you can see here, the trees have grown back in, but you can drive the road here. This is the frontage road for Highway 24. If you go down into town there, this looks almost identical to what it did back then, you know, without the depot there. Coming up to getting closer to Ute Pass. Again, this was all a solid grade coming out of Colorado City. This was not an easy climb by any stretch of the imagination, and how they ever designed it and did that. It was amazing that they could do that through there. But you can see Pikes Peak in the background here, and you look down, you can see where all the lumber came to build all the buildings. There's tree stumps everywhere. You know, it's amazing that there's as many trees as there were in this, but there's tree stumps everywhere. Again, now we're back up there to a flag stop on the railroad. Again, narrow platform here. There was some reason, and I can't remember what it was, is why the Colorado Midland would not build a depot in this station. So the residents actually built their own depot. They all got together and decided, we're going to build our own depot here. So the railroad did not, this was not a railroad depot. This was a town depot here. The town built it. Only thing the railroad had here was the platform there. Again, some of these are still here. The bar and grill is still here. It's taken over one of these buildings over here. Coming up to Woodland Park. I mean, Woodland Park today is huge. It's amazing how much that has grown up through there. But here you're coming again, freight depot here, coming up through Woodland Park. And there's a bunch of other stuff we'll see in Woodland Park here. But Woodland Park had a huge hotel there. You know, population was what, 300 here, it said in 1896, and then it had dropped to 260. Not a very big town back in the day, but you can see coming through town here. But when you look at some of the next slides here, as we come around the corner here, again, this is where the Walmart sits now. So the Walmart sits right about on this right through here now. That's where they did. The grading was still visible up until the day that the Walmart was built. But again, if you look at the engine here, you can see the lettering, and this was a different lettering scheme, but how ornate it looked on there and how shiny the engine was, Russian iron, probably, and different paint schemes on the cars there. Woodland Park Eatery. This was not the depot. This was actually a hotel eatery. Again, supposedly a Harvey house at one point to build this up here. But again, huge building, very ornate looking, all the different, windows up top here and stuff like that. Just kind of a neat building on that side. It was remodeled into a hotel at one point, replaced the depot that you'll see here. This was the depot that was built afterwards. The old one, you can see the old hotel in the background here. This half of the depot burned, but this half here is what this is now. This is in a park up behind, it's called Memorial Park. It's up behind the town in Woodland Park. And so this part of it did survive over here, coming here. Also in Woodland Park, and I don't remember the street, when you go down one of the side streets, if you go into the alley, there's actually a passenger car or the body of a passenger car in someone's backyard there that is part of a shed in their house. The whole car is there complete, but it's in Woodland Park. It's down, you have to go down the alley and through, and you pull up there and you stop and you look at it, and sure enough, there's a passenger car sitting there. It might be a baggage car, but it's a passenger car sitting there and it's just in someone's backyard and they use it as a shed. Once Midland Terminal was abandoned, they bought it there. Again, here's the hotel again, Midland Hotel back there. And you saw that back in the other picture here. Oh, sorry. We'll click, I keep happy there. But this is the building back here. So this is the hotel that we see in the next slide here. Again, ornate fencing, just, again, the attention to detail that they did and the amount of time that it had to be to build even the fences back then was just always amazing. And again, present day location of Starbucks. What else? Because there's got to be a Starbucks everywhere. So unfortunately, it was torn down not until 1960, where it was torn down into the 60s. So it lasted a long time up there on there. Again, a view of the Pikes Peak from Woodland Park. This view here is, you still have this view nowadays. This is about where the bank is on the west in town there, where they actually moved where the Pikes Peak cars from the Cog Railroad. So you can still see that basically this view, because this is still a field here. You can still see that on that side of it. From there, we move up to Divide. So this is the first depot in Divide here. This one burned down at one point. This is where the Midland Terminal also split off of the Colorado Midland later on and went up to Cripple Creek. The Midland Terminal was a separate railroad from the Colorado Midland. They shared trackage from Colorado City to Divide and then went off to Divide into Cripple Creek. The Colorado Midland technically never went into Cripple Creek. The Midland Terminal went in there. But again, this is the original depot here. This was the one that was rebuilt here. So this building here and this pictures of it still exists today. But from here, the Midland Terminal went off towards and around the back of that. There's a group in Divide that's actually restoring the depot. They have done a tremendous amount of work on the depot. If you haven't seen the depot in Divide lately, they've dug out a lot of the dirt around here, stabilized the building quite a bit, and they've actually even have a Midland Terminal, a Midland Colorado Midland boxcar up there that they just moved in there that they're stabilizing and working on there. Again, this is the town of Divide. Looks like your typical Western town. You can see all the ties stacked here on this side here, all the different buildings downtown here. I mean, to me, this is a typical Western town you could see in any Western movie, any place like that. The walkways here. And again, just all the stuff coming in from the sawmill And I'm not sure if this is to build the railroad or to build the line to divide from Divide over on that side. And then this is here a little bit later looking at. The railroad built a bypass that the railroad used to come through here, and you can see where this bridge is here. The railroad actually dug a trench through here and relocated part of the railroad at one point, and they called it the Panama Canal. And it was called that because they used some of the same type of equipment that was used to dig the Panama Canal to dig this out through here. And you can see this is where it came through. So here's the depot right here. This is the Midland terminal coming off, going over to Cripple Creek. And then the railroad comes around this way, where the railroad originally came over this way. This was the Panama Canal that they dug through here. And you can see here's the original, some of the original line coming all the way around here that went off to the town. And this is what this is what they call the Panama Canal. This was the cut that they made through the summit. This was the summit of the railroad here. Ute Pass was the pass they went through, and this was the summit of it here. So this was where it went through here. And this is what it looks like today. It's still a dirt road. The only thing that's missing is the bridge, a lot more trees, but this is what it looks like. It wasn't today, but it was probably about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, where this picture came from. Again, looking towards the divide here. Leadville Road was the road from Woodland Park to Leadville before the railroad was here. This is the railroads taken from the railroad grade, but this is the road that went up back and across over to Leadville. Then on our way over to Florissa here, this is Dome Rock. Again, the two, pretty obviously, I think every railroad had a Dome Rock. The Denver South Park had the Dome Rock in Platte Canyon. Again, this was all part of the same. I don't know if it's all part of the same formations and stuff. I'm not a geologist, but again, everybody had a Dome Rock at some point on there, just like a Windy Point and certain other points. There are certain names that went with every railroad out there. And then this is the town, Florissa here. Again, where the tracks are Highway 24 today. Obviously, the town hasn't boomed yet on that side, but again, a typical Western town. Water tank, your depot was here. The train tracks came right through the middle there and up the road there. Interesting part is that at one point, Florissa, Walt Disney was interested in there because of all of the, not minerals, but I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. Fossils, yeah, fossils that were there. So I've been told that Walt Disney had a big ownership at some of this, in some of this part, or some of his family did at one point. But again, you can see the railroad coming through the town here, and the town's starting to grow a little bit here on that side of it. And then, the railroad was obviously busier, bigger freight house here, depot here. Again, a lot of this stuff was there, again, torn down by the 70s by the Park Service. Before we decided that we were going to save stuff, we tore a lot of it down. And this is the siding just west of town here on that side. Again, you can see this is more to show the railroad how, the tie spacing was close. They were all cut ties, weren't hand hewn ties. Everything was spiked well. The rail was all in great shape. Railroad was built to last a long time. It wasn't built to what eventually happened to it and get so run down that it fell apart on that side. So from here, we're coming out of Florissa. Highway 24 cuts off. The railroad cuts off around this way, around the South Fork here, and goes on to Hartselle. And this is where 11 Mile Reservoir is here, and Lake George area and stuff like that. Real hard to see in here, but ice house over here. This was a huge ice house that they stored amazing amount of ice in for Colorado Springs, Colorado City. Depot way over here, and the town was way over here. I never got a good explanation from anyone as why is there a depot here when the town is way over here? Doesn't to me, and the ice house is in the middle. It doesn't really make any sense unless there was something else here, but why they did that, I have no idea. It's just one of those interesting things you look at and say, okay, what were they really thinking, or why did they do this type of stuff? But tremendous amount of ice came off of Lake George here, stored here all year round with sawdust, stuff like that. And then the railroad shipped a lot of ice on the railroad. That was one of their biggest commodities that they shipped from on railroad was ice. Otherwise, for the most part, the railroad, unless it was coming out of Aspen, was a bridge railroad. And a lot of stuff went through on the railroad there. Here you can see a better shot of this is the ice house here. Again, huge wooden structure up there. I'm not sure how they loaded all the ice up, but you can see the freight cars here. Typical Midland, gone to the Target logo here now, which was very similar to what the Colorado Southern went to on the logo too. They call it the bullseye target here. Again, there was some intertwining between the railroads, between the management of the Colorado Southern and the Colorado Midland at points and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that overlaps between the railroads there and how they move stuff from one railroad to another without being owned by the same company, but just because the employees moved one to the other and they did stuff that way. Again, the town of Lake George, still not much of a town even today. It's kind of a neat little town, just all the wood structures there. Has to be a miserable place to be in the winter because it is cold up there. Again, coming out of there, we come out into Granite Canyon there. Again, they used a lot of the advertising for Granite Canyon there. I can't remember if this is a Buckwalter photo, I think if it is here. But this area through here was used for a lot of photographs, a lot of advertising on the Colorado Midland throughout this whole area here. Again, Dome Rock, another Dome Rock, not the same Dome Rock as the last one. This is a different Dome Rock in there. Again, back to the newer logo. This was the newer logo here with the star on top. Again, track work here. And again, fishing, huge amount of people fishing up there. But again, track work looked to be in very good shape, very well built. And again, there it is back, a couple of years ago as it looks now. Tunnel number 9. This is the first tunnel in Granite Canyon. There's a bunch of them coming through here. This is starting to come down through Hartsdale there. Again, a lot of these tunnels are road tunnels. So you can drive through these. You can see all the soot and stuff on the roofs of these, but these were just cut out of here, and they're there to drive through and there to go explore today. There's a better view of this is tunnel 10 and 11, but again, they all look kind of the same. Same shape. I always like the way they stop the people. Again, get out. Obviously, some Chinese here on that side, probably different on here. But again, caboose on the train, not a passenger train coming through here. Again, same location today. All drivable, real pretty area to go see. And that, some of the people I know that go up here, and they come through this area and they look for artifacts on this side of the train, because when the diners went through, when they had broken china, they would just throw it out the window. So they would find shards on this side because of the train going up the hill there. So there are a lot of people that will go up and look on these areas, and there's an amazing amount of stuff that still comes up through there, even though the railroad was abandoned over 100 years ago. Again, tunnel 11 here, again, how it's blocking, blackened all the stuff here from the soot from the engines and stuff like that. 11 Mile Reservoir was Idlewild. A town here is a picnic area, stuff like that. The reservoir was built in 1930. Again, part of the old railroad bed was underneath it. And, some of the stuff was rerouted over Wilkinson Pass there. We get along. Spinery was a huge town for the railroad. This is where they ran the wildflower excursions to. So the Colorado Midland ran a lot of wildflower excursions out of Colorado City and they would go out and pick wildflowers. And if you ever look at anything from the Colorado Midland or any of the books or any of the other stuff, you'll find millions of postcards of people with pictures from the Midland terminal, from the Midland, Colorado Midland, doing the wildflower trips. Well, this is where the wildflower trips would be turned up here. So they would bring them up here, allow people to get off the train. They go pick wildflowers during the day. They get back on the train and take the wildflowers back into the town. So this was a day excursion or out of town, and they'd come up here and they had a Y up here where they would turn the train for the railroad up here. So here's where we started down here. This is coming through Hartselle. What is Hartselle today? And there's the depot here, water tank, a couple of cars here, hot springs over here. Hot springs were very popular with the Indians back in the day, and then they were going to develop Hartselle into a hot springs resort area till they found out that the hot springs were all heated by radium and they were all radioactive. Hence the end of those. But this was a very popular, was going to be developed, and the railroad had plans on developing that until they discovered that it was all radioactive in there. So that kind of changed their plans on what they were going to do on the railroad there. So, but again, this is coming up through South Park. All of a sudden we come out of the canyon over here and it gets super flat there, coming through through Hartselle here. Again, here's what it looks like today. Here's the depot. The town is more or less is over this way, but here's a depot that still exists today. A couple of the outbuildings that are still there and the old hot springs over here. There is a group that's trying to restore or to stabilize the depot here. I'm not sure how much progress they're making. It's in pretty rough shape, but they are trying to, there is a group that's trying to stabilize it and restore it a little bit to do it on that side of it. But it's pretty far gone, but it is still standing. Again, oh, back the wrong way. That's the depot. This depot here that you see, this is actually the freight depot. This isn't the passenger depot. This is actually the freight depot. So this is a different depot than this one is here that you see in this photograph. Again, stock pens, anything in the South Park was big with stock up there. They had, they ran a lot of stock through there. So that was always a big business for the railroad, is moving stock through there. I love the population of 60 back in the day. You probably knew everybody in town pretty well if you're there. The other things I always look at these on is I look at the Wells Fargo Express here, signs. Some of the other signage that you see on these buildings is interesting because Colorado Midland had a contract with Wells Fargo Express. The Colorado Southern Denver South Park was Adams Express. So there's two different express companies handled a lot of the different express stuff coming in through the mountains that way. So there were different express companies. Wells Fargo was the biggest by far, but Adams was another one. I always look at the depot, look at the venting up here on that, and how the roof isn't lack of symmetrical here, how all the snow is going to fall right to where everyone stands on the platform. If you think about it, it's like, why would you build that big roof this way and not overhang where your people are going to be standing? So anytime it snows, this is going to fill in with snow through here. Little things like that, just, never understand. So, and here's a depot. This was a depot a few years ago on there. And again, tracks coming through town here, water tank. This was the hot springs here that they were going to develop at that point. Again, this was the ranch that was up here and the hotel. So this was, all this here was one big ranch at one point, and that's what the railroad here with the stockyards and everything was able to capitalize on some of that moving stock back and forth through there. Coming out of here, this is coming out of Hartselle here. The Colorado Midland comes through here, and here is Trout Creek Pass right here. Here's the Denver South Park coming through, and they both come down into Buena Vista and Anthrop in that area there. So this was, the railroads actually crossed over each other here. again, some of this, we were up here last 2 years ago. I was up, or 3 years ago is now. We walked some of this grade in here. This grade is in a cut. And there was at one point there was a head-on collision in here, and we went in to walk this. This is all Trout Creek Pass neighborhood over here. It's all developed now. But this area through here that you can walk through this grade, ties are still down, spikes everywhere. It's just amazing how much, this was abandoned in 1918, how much stuff is still existing today that you can go walk this area here. You feel like you're walking through people's backyard because you virtually are. Their houses are way up in here, but you're walking this, and all the stuff is still sitting there just today from 100 years ago that it was pulled up. And the ties, some of the ties are still as solid as can be through this area here. It said through this cut, but there was at one point there was a head-on collision somewhere in this area right and through here. And we walked back into that area with the group here. But on top of Trout Creek Pass, there was a Y, and we'll get up to that point there. Again, one of the famous, what I consider one of the famous things of some of the Trout Creek, where this would have been the South Park coming through here, the Colorado Southern, and the Colorado Midland going over the top of this. The famous, I don't know if people ever seen this, but this, if the trains ever cross each other, whoever knows, but running at the same time. But just kind of a neat, what could have been back in the day of the two railroads crossing each other, virtually even back then in the middle of no place. I mean, this was truly, from Hartsville and every place else, this was the middle of no place, and the two railroads actually crossed each other there. I just always find it kind of interesting that how things work out there. Again, this is Newlet or Bath was up here. This is where the railroads, CNS, where they ran a short distance together from each other. And there was talk, and no one ever proved it, but there was some sightings up here where the two railroads would actually interchange some traffic up here. There was a gentleman named Darrell Poole that did a lot of information, did a lot of research on this area, and found some of the sightings and where some of the stuff was. There was never any real documentation about what was there at one point, but they say Newlet or Bath, there was actually where they would actually transfer some stuff between the two railroads. Again, if it was true, it's all theory in that side of it. So don't know if it's really true. Again, coming into Buena Vista from there, come down the hill around there. Here's the courthouse. This is the Colorado Midland up here. Rio Grande was down through here. Technically, the Colorado Midland really never went into the town. The Colorado Midland was up high on, I guess it would be the east side of town here. Again, these are the Collegiate Peaks over here. Denver South Park went in here, but really they went up towards Alpine Tunnel from this point. But the Rio Grande came straight through the middle here. So the Colorado Midland had to stay way up high here through here. Again, you can see here's where the depot was. This was the town was way down here. This was the road that come in here, and the railroad actually had its own stage company that actually ferried people back and forth from here. The depot, bunkhouse for crews up here. Again, you can see some freight cars over here, but again, it really wasn't in town. It was way out of town, and they had to run stages back and forth into town from there. And here's basically a shot of it where it is today. You can see how the city has expanded quite a bit from where it was back in the day. But this is some of the grade here through here. One of the more famous trestles there. Again, similar trestle to the one that was we saw earlier. Same one that was similar going into Aspen. They use the same type of structures. Kind of gives you the Georgetown Loop feel to it. Type bridge on that side of it. Doesn't look very sturdy when you think about all the weights on it, but it got the job done. Again, coming across here. Again, and here's the footings for the bridge all here. This was taken about 5 years ago here of all the footings from the bridge, and you can see the abutment over here coming across. We're standing on the other abutment going across here. So bridge, these are the footings here, but footings were built to last. They lasted a long time. They're still very visible, very good shape, haven't deteriorated much at all. Again, once we're through Buena Vista, here's the Rio Grande tracks down here. There was a road to Leadville over here. Since the Rio Grande was built along the river, they had to build up higher here. They came through later, so they're up higher here. One of the tunnels here coming through here. Again, these were still narrow gauge tracks down here. These hadn't been standard gauge yet. These are the standard gauge up here. Basically the same place today. Looking out. Again, the abandoned Rio Grande tracks down here now. Road is still here, going through here. A few more trees, but again, this is all drivable. Great place if you're a mountain biker to go mountain biking up here, drive through here, and you can go up into the river. In the spring, the river, the kayakers on here are wall to wall almost. It's pretty interesting to see how many go through there on that. Again, the 3 tunnels here, there's the tunnels that are in a row here. 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 here. Drivable today. Still just a dirt road through there. Can still drive through there today on that. Sphinx Rock, or Elephant Rock as it was called, was a stop where they come out and do photographs. I'm not sure how they did, they come out, do photographs, but then, it's not like today where you can go and have it developed. So if you wanted to print a view in the photograph, how did you get it back in the day? I don't know. It's something that when I look at it and say, okay, well, they do these photographs, and you see all the railroads did that too. Everyone would get out, walk the bridge and take a picture out there. If you were one of these people here, how would you get a copy of that? Did you have to wait till it got developed and prints made, or did you order it in that? It's one of those things that kind of makes you think about, okay, they did the photographs, but for what reason? Passenger cars here. This is what it looks like today. The rock's kind of falling apart a little bit on there, but that's where it comes through here. The interesting part about the passenger cars, and you can see a little bit in this one, how these two look darker than this one. The Colorado Midland cars were different colors. So they had their immigrant cars, the first class cars, and the standard cars, and they were all 3 of them were different colors. Years ago, and Art and AJ Hunhousing did a lot of research on this. They published a book, I think. What was the book? Dave, do you remember what the book name is that they published? It was Next Stop Pikes Peak, I believe, that the Railroad Museum published to him. But there's some cars that exist on Bald Hill today, and we went through these cars and we took up the plates, some of the metal plates, and found the yellow color underneath them. So to prove that at one point they were, this car back here is probably yellow. Just the film in the day makes them look darker, but these were probably yellow. And that follows the Santa Fe practices of each class of car had a different paint scheme. So you had the Pullman, you had the green, you had the red, and then you had the yellow cars on that side. It's kind of interesting when we pulled some plates up and found underneath the car, underneath these plates, that they had the yellow in there, and that's how they kind of proved it here. Again, coming out of Buena Vista here, again, the town's about over here, coming through Colorado Midland. This is the 2 railroads paralleling each other here. So you had the Rio Grande and you had the Colorado Midland basically paralleled each other through this area, through the canyon here. If you drive this today, the highway is right on this side over here. But a lot of this stuff here, when you drive this, you can see where the Rio Grande is, and then you can still see the Midland grade. And once the Midland was abandoned, the Rio Grande actually took over some of the grade from the Colorado Midland because it was built on the better side of the river coming through here. So they moved stuff around here. As we're getting close now, we're approaching Leadville up here, where Leadville's over here. Again, Arkansas Junction's here. Again, the railroad came through and they had a Y here, or they cut off this way to go into town. The railroad technically didn't go into town. They kind of bypassed the town and had a loop that went around into town. But we'll get there here. So again, we're here in Granite. So this is Granite. Again, town is still here today. Not much there. This is the only other town in Lake County besides Leadville is Granite. Depot through here, 2 railroads coming through the town here, one on the side. This is where the highway is today. And then this is the town where it is today on that side of it. There's really not much in Granite today. But it was actually, again, at one point they said they wanted to make it the county seat. And then they moved it into Lake County. It was actually part of Lake County. And this is where we kind of end this portion of the program, where we come into Leadville. Leadville's near and dear to my heart. I have a house up in Leadville that pretty much overlooks the old yard there. But Leadville was a neat town served by Rio Grande, CNS, Colorado Midland up there. They're interchanged, tracks everywhere. But the railroad didn't come into the rail railroad went and continued up the Hardeman Pass, and then had a loop that came into town to went into what the depot was back in the day there. And this is where we're going to end the show here. This is the depot in Leadville. Amazingly big structure. This is actually a full 2 city blocks long, this depot was. The ornate brickwork up here with it, the logo in the here, again, was Spruce is 4 blocks from downtown Leadville though. So you were 4 blocks west of the town. You weren't technically in downtown. Coming into here, there was a huge trestle coming into here that you'd be over here. And then you went down this way into the roundhouse where the roundhouse was, and there was a yard there, facilities where they did loading. But again, the depot here, just an amazing building that really isn't photographs. There's no photographs from the other side of this. And I don't know, I've never really heard the story of when it was, it was torn down in the 30s, but why it was. I mean, today the road there, there's just a couple of small houses here. It's just kind of a neat, it's an amazing building for the town of Leadville, where the railroad was really the 3rd railroad to town after the CNS and the Rio Grande was. So they were really the 3rd railroad to reach town here. But they built an elaborate facility here. This was the depot, the eating house down here, and the freight section down here on that side of it. And again, you can see here, this is where you can see this is the depot, how big the depot was in conjunction to stuff. The town of Leadville is really about over here. This is the tracks coming in. This is where the yard is here. In this area, you can still walk this in through here. This is there's ball fields over here, tennis courts over here, where some of this was, and still to this day pick up tie plates, spikes, things like that. My house is right about over here where that is. It's one down here where I live. Doing some research Dan Abbott did, that he found out that my house was owned by one of the workers in the roundhouse for the Colorado Midland. Dan Abbott did some work on that on there. But this is the elementary school right through here. These tracks here were all loading. And this was all loading by wagon. They would actually wagon the freight into town here and come up these ramps and load all the stuff in the box cars by hand through these ramps through here. And that is where we're going to leave it right there. From here, the railroad went on through up to Hagerman Tunnel or Bucks into Aspen, over the Glenwood Springs and through over to Grand Junction. Open it up if anyone has any questions. Yes. I believe that the DSP&P was the first one into Leadville. I can't remember the exact order. Don, Don, you know, don't you? No, come on. I thought you would know. I believe it was though. I believe the DSP&P was, yeah. Yes. So the early demise of the railroad, depending on what you believe and what you want to read, was either a scheme by the Rio Grande, and the Rio Grande had a lot more money back then. So during World War II, when the FRA took over the railroads to do that, the condition of the Midland had deteriorated quite a bit. And a lot of the east-west traffic was shoved more or less over the Colorado Midland. And at that point, the Colorado Midland could not handle it. They didn't have the facilities, the track was in bad shape, things like that. And again, if depending on what you believe and what you read, is that that was the Rio Grande's plan, is to push as much traffic over that during the war to make them realize that this railroad's not viable and to move stuff to the Rio Grande instead. That's the quote unquote unwritten story, I guess you'd say, from that. But that is why it was one of the first abandoned railroads that way. So what they say. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me? It's Andrew from New Jersey online. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you showed pictures of a road that you can drive, a gravel road somewhere around west of Divide that follows the railroad grade.
Yes.
What color? What road is that?
It's one of the Forest Service roads. I don't know the exact Forest Service road that it is. I probably have it written down someplace, but I don't know it off the top of my head. I can kind of weave my way into there, but it is all Forest Service road through there. Okay,
because I've driven the Phantom Canyon and I've driven Marshall Pass with no problems. I didn't know that was doable also.
Yeah, it's doable through there. It is a Forest Service road. I can't remember the name of the road, unfortunately. I'm sorry, the number, but it's not as well known as obviously the two that you had driven there through that area. Oh, sorry. Oh, at home. Yeah, that's right. It would switch. Yeah.
Do you know why the train depot in Leadville was torn down? That's a beautiful building.
Oh, it's a beautiful building. I don't know for sure. I imagine it was torn down just for the wood, for the rest of the town growing, or for the mine. You know, it was probably sitting empty at that point and probably deteriorating. And they probably took and repurposed the lumber for something else on there. Yep. Yes.
Is the present day depot and steam engine and tourist railroad and the church that we walked right by to get to it, does that show up in this map? Or is it off screen?
Yeah, so the tourist railroad would be off over here. So that was part of the Colorado Southern or the Denver South Park. So that, yeah, if you come down, Spruce Street is about 300 west of Harrison. Harrison's the main street through town. And then you go 2 blocks further east to get to the depot for the Leadville and Colorado Southern Railroad. So that is more over this way here. And that was the original CNS grade over there, or Denver South Park grade up to Climax. So Tennessee Pass would be, this would come back, this loop back into town here and join somewhere over here. Basically it would join, yeah, well, this would come around. So this is downtown. This comes around, and Turquoise Lake would be like over here. And this would loop back over going up to Hagerman. And then it would be over this way where it would loop over going up Tennessee Pass. So the Rio Grande, although they did come up into town here, they also ran around like this through on the outskirts of town. They really ran through where it's called Antero Junction over there. And actually the Rio Grande, I have a map where the Rio Grande actually took over the Midland yard, not this yard here, but there was another yard over here. And they took over that yard from the Colorado Midland back in around 1919, where they took it over to go over Tennessee Pass there. But this is closer to where, I don't know if you're familiar with Leadville. The hospital is, St. Vincent's is right about over here in town. So Tennessee Pass is a ways out of town here yet.
Where's the grill at?
The grill? Which grill? The grill in Leadville's is on Harrison. That's over this way. Yeah, so it's about 2 blocks over. From this street here, it's 3 blocks towards town on that side. So again, it's interesting because Spruce Street here, where this goes through, ends. This is 7th Street right here, and this doesn't go through anymore. This is just a hill here. This was what's called Millionaire's Ridge up here, or Millionaire's Hill up here, where all the bankers, things like that, all big houses up through this area here. This street here there's photographs. This was the sledding hill. This area up here is where the Ice Palace was when they did the Ice Palace. And they actually built a toboggan hill that came down Spruce Street or down 7th Street here and went right into town. And that's where the tobogganing hill was from the Ice Palace up here. Oh, yeah. One thing I didn't show a picture of on there is, again, as the Colorado Midland was kind of famous for their advertising and that, this was the Hanrahan Reefer. This was kind of the famous car of the Colorado Midland, that they had the Hanrahan Reefer that were painted bright yellow with all the drop lettering and the Indian logo on the side of it. So this is actually a model that a friend of mine built off of a kit that I produced many years ago in HO of the Hanrahan Reefer. So 2 doors, center icing in it, kind of a unique car, lasted through the Midland Terminal days. Up on Divide at a house kind of off the street and back a few blocks is actually a body of one of these, still exists up there. It's been modified quite tremendously, but these cars were lasted through. They took the 1 door out and made these into different cars. But the Colorado Midland had, I think, about 25 of these cars. Also, the Santa Fe had almost 250 of these cars, the Hanrahan Reefers. And the only difference between the two were the hinges on the doors. Otherwise, they were identical cars, but they used the different hardware on there. And they all had the Hanrahan patent. If you're looking close at the car, you can see the Hanrahan patent system on there for their airflow on there. That's what this is here.
Anybody else online got any questions?
One other thing I say, if you're interested in the Colorado Midland, Colorado Midland Quarterly is still published by Mel McFarland out of Colorado Springs. Comes out quarterly, has detailed information like you can't believe on the Colorado Midland about car movements, fires, whatever, you name it. They would scour. I mean, there are people who scour every newspaper from Aspen and from all the towns about what cars went through town or what went through town, things like that. They do have a bi-yearly convention where we get together. It's usually about 20, 25 people, and we'll cover certain things about the railroad, depending on what town it is. They rotate from town to town. It's been, Buena Vista, Colorado Springs, Leadville, Basalt. So it moves from place to place on there. But if you're interested in more and want to learn more about the Colorado Midland, that's a great way to do it. There's a ton of information in those. If you get a chance, take a look at this. Some of the research that Art Hunhousing does in here is phenomenal. It's unbelievable how much research and how much stuff that they can glean from newspapers and other things that are out there.
Thanks, Andrew, again. Is that road the one that runs along the South Platte River? I see on Google a number 96.
That sounds familiar. I can't swear to it, but I think so.
It goes southwest from around Lake George off towards the.
Yes, yeah. Yep, that would be the one there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You can get off it from off of Highway 24. There's access to it off of 24.
Right.
Yep. Thank you. Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Do you have time to hang around a minute if people have any questions? Okay. Next month, Richard Luckin will be here to present his video program on the Pullman cars. And I'm still working on what's coming up for May. We don't have anything locked in, but that should be hopefully in the next newsletter. Keith has lots of things up here. Keith is our treasurer. And if you wanted to look at videos or books, we've got some things available. And if you would help us out by hanging up the black chairs on that rack in the back, they go sideways. The white plastic chairs don't need to be hung up. Any questions? All right. Well, thanks. Thanks for coming.